Okay, welcome everyone. Grab your beverage of choice and maybe keep the antacids within reach because we need to talk about the election platform nonsense. I'm Nick, your host.
I'm Rio.
And I'm German.
And yes, it is nonsense. Not because policy doesn't matter, but because apparently nobody got the memo that elections aren't supposed to be a surprise party. Let me tell you why that's bullshit. The Liberals dropped their platform on Easter weekend, the sacred time when Canadians are traditionally reading 65 pages of policy PDFs over chocolate bunnies and awkward brunches with their in-laws. And the Conservatives held out even longer, waiting until Wednesday, April 26th, aka the literal last possible moment to publish theirs. Not a soft launch, not a leak, just surprise, here's our entire vision for the country. Hope you can read fast. Seriously, how are we supposed to engage meaningfully with platforms they clearly didn't want us to read? This isn't a group project, it's a national election. And treating voters like we're the kid you remember after the PowerPoint's already been emailed to the teacher, that's not leadership, that's disrespect. So in this episode, we're going to break it all down. Not just what they're saying, but what they're hiding, who they're blaming, and why some of this reads like fanfic. You're going to hear the vibes and voices straight from the source. We've got conservative promises to lock up criminals and cut red tape like it's 1995, and Jean Chrétien just got a modem. Liberal manifestos about sovereignty and shadows, and bold decorations like if America won't lead, Canada will. Okay, Carney, calm down. We're still using fax machines in some government offices. So let's dive in.
We have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now.
I wanted to talk about U.S. relations. Both parties had U.S. relations stuff in their platforms for obvious reasons. The Liberals focused more on it than the Conservatives did because, as I said earlier, the Liberals really, really want you to remember Trump exists. So really quickly, the Liberals matched 25% tariffs, which, by the way, I was a little confused about. German, you would know in watching the debate, there was that question about, do you support dollar for dollar tariffs? And Mark Carney said no. So I was kind of like interested in this. I know like a percent isn't the same as dollar for dollar, but I feel like it's kind of a tomato type situation.
Yeah, it definitely can be for sure. And it depends on the percentage too, right? When you think about it. And it depends on what you define as dollar to dollar. I think a lot of times these budgets and these things, when you say, I don't support dollar to dollar tariffs, well, if you don't support dollar to dollar tariffs, depending on, like you said, tomato, like it technically could be the same at some point, but I'd have to look into more the detailedness of what he meant by dollar to dollar, or even source out what dollar to dollar would mean to
It just
him.
feels like political speak to me.
It does. It definitely does feel like it's like you said, tomato, or whatever, right? So I just feel like he's just kind of changing the word to make it seem like it's not dollar to dollar, but it actually is. I'm not sure, like I said, but at the same time, is it helpful? Not at all. Is the moral of the story? It's not helpful for anyone, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah. And then they go on to say temporary removal of the 1 week EI wait period to buffer trade related job losses, which I believe they already implemented pretty much right away when all of this started happening. Strategic response funds of $2 billion to protect the auto sector. They've also said that all tariff revenue will go to, again, help workers. And then they also, and this was kind of weird, and it might seem confusing to be in U.S. relations and trade and tariffs, but there was a huge emphasis on food security, investment in greenhouses, hydroponics, and fisheries to sort of insulate us from those tariffs and trade issues. I was actually really happy to see this. Rio and I worked in student unions for a while together, and one of the big things was food insecurity. Rio and I spent like a year engulfed in food security research, which focused mostly on students, but we also had to look at the bigger picture of Canadian food security, which hasn't been great. So this was kind of one of those things when I was reading it as a sociologist. I was like, good, somebody's finally talking about things like food security. Later, we'll see that Mark Carney talks the Liberals talk about in their platform how to offset rental affordability, which is great because, again, German and I have talked about this week about how they're basically ignoring the rental market in affordability. So that was the Liberals, and then the Conservatives. Nothing really changed. They said maintain counter-tariffs, same as Liberals match 25%. Use counter-tariff revenue for broad tax relief and some targeted worker support. There are, again, some hair splitting between the two parties, but by and by, it's about the same. Both of them are saying they're going to use that tariff revenue to support workers in some way. Conservatives want to cut the GST on Canadian-made vehicles, create a $3 billion Keep Canadians Working Fund, offering low-interest loans and credit lines. And then they also pledged to renegotiate the softwood lumber deal. And then later they also pledged to renegotiate the trade agreement with the U.S. So I thought that was kind of weird because you would think that softwood lumber would be a part of that. And then they want to seek new trade pacts with UK, Australia, and New Zealand, as do the Liberals. So pretty
I mean, like, I'm pro Kanzuk. Like, I've said that several times. I'm pro Kanzuk. So it's nice to see that both of them are on the same page. But
you know what's interesting I've noticed just in general, like just briefly reading it, they talk about, like Trump, for example, and the tariff situation in the state from Canada and the States. They talk about, like, for example, the Liberals talk about tariffs 16 times and they mention trade wars 13 times.
Yeah.
And I know that in the Conservatives, they mention it's tariffs 7 times and uses the expression of trade war once. So you can see the language, you can see the word choice and see how different it is. So I don't want to like dive into it because it could be another discussion on words and things like that. But I think it's
right up my alley.
I think that's more important to recognize is that you can see where the Conservatives stand on trade war or tariffs compared to the Liberals, for example. And it seems like the Liberal platform is focusing on this, declaration of sovereignty and threat more than the Conservatives are focusing on more affordability and crime. So you
Which
can
is
see
the
that
same throughout this whole campaign too, right?
Yeah, and that's how it's always been, right, throughout the campaign. So you can see where the Liberals are really focusing on and where they're trying to drive the narratives for sure. And you see that Conservatives are not really seeing it as a serious matter as much compared to the Liberals for sure. But that's up to people to interpret themselves.
I mean, there's something to be said about the language conversation. I mean, I'm the sociologist in the group. I've talked Rio's ear off before about the importance of how we use language. And I don't know if you were here yet, but I was talking to Rio for sure earlier about how I was tagging how many times Mark Carney said the word sovereignty in his 65-page document, which was at least twice a page, and how often the Conservatives said lost Liberal decade, which was also between 1 and 2 times a page. So there's a very different language approach. The Conservatives want you to remember Justin Trudeau. They want to be running against Justin Trudeau. They want to talk about affordability and where homes have been, which is quite interesting because the Conservatives keep pointing out that homes only cost $450,000 during the Harper era, which was a doubling prior to that. So that kind of always makes me laugh a little bit. That's neither here nor there, though. But I think it's worth mentioning that it's important to pay attention to the language that parties are using because it says so much about what they're going to do in government. I mean, platforms are one thing. And a lot of the time, we probably will see changes to this. We'll see things that won't come to pass. But if you look at the language they're using, you can really start to see where their thought process is going to be and what they're going to do. Mark Carney, very much sovereignty, protect Canada. It is a little concerning because he also sounds a little isolationist in it when he talks about how much he wants to do with interprovincial trade. So that'll be interesting to watch come to pass. Canada's actually fairly new in free trade era. We were actually very isolationist prior to the 1988 free trade election. So that's within my lifetime. And I'm only 40. Well, 41, 40 and a half. So yeah, there's something to be said with how politicians are talking about the different issues, right?
Yeah.
One thing I did want to mention, Rio, did you have anything you wanted to kind of jump in there about? Good. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting, I don't want to spend like too much time on the NDP platform. Not that they're not relevant, but they're not going to form parliament. And I want this to be informative for people. But in their U.S. relations section, they say specifically bar Trump from the G7 summit in Kananaskis over sovereignty concerns, which I kind of thought was funny. We do know the question has come up, well, how is Trump going to get into Canada because he's a convicted felon? Obviously, there are diplomatic exceptions. I did some research into this, and they have said that they will actually have to give, when Trump comes, an actual form, and there's somebody within the government that will be doing it. And it's basically been told, like, when Trump comes, you have to make sure this form is done and filled out. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they weren't just going to be like, whatever, just come into our country. They are going to have a process on what that looks like. That could change if the Conservatives win, obviously. What do you guys think of that? Because I thought it is quite a funny idea. It'll never happen because he's the leader of the United States. I don't know if he'll come. He might just send his crony, Rubio.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a new level of international pettiness, I feel like. Like, okay.
Fuck
yeah,
Trump.
like, you know, I get it. Like, absolutely not a fan of Trump. Like, hate the guy. But, like, I feel like there's Jagmeet Singh and the NDP could have used their platform to say something better. You know, like, I get it, but like, it's international pettiness. What are you going to do? Like, oh, well, he had to fill out a form. It took 5 minutes. Like,
yeah, I mean, if you watched the debate, you would know that Jagmeet Singh had a lot of pettiness going on, but it was strategic, right? And here's the one thing I will say about the NDP. Jagmeet Singh went into the debate in this platform basically fighting for his life. And his job right now is to say to Canadians, you need us to hold Mark Carney accountable when he gets power, is sort of the position he has taken. Now, with that said, if the Conservatives win a majority government, that's not happening, and they're going to laugh at him and tell him to go away. Yeah. So he really is trying to fight back at this strategic vote, and that was to remind people that he existed, which is why he was being obnoxious in both leadership debates, to the point where the French moderator turned off his mic and was like, enough. I'm done with your interrupting.
Yeah.
And I think he did a good job of it too, saying like, I'm here, pay attention to me. This is why you need me. I'm not afraid to say this to them. I'm not afraid to interrupt. I'm not afraid to be aggressive. I think that was sort of the point.
Yeah.
And his seat is is in play too right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big issue, right?
For sure. Yeah. Okay.